How's it going, guys? Track Bro here. I hope everybody's having a great post holiday 2026. Today, I wanted to make a special video for you guys. This is an idea I've been kind of having multiple times in my life. It's building the ultimate supercar and why that's important for me. I think the reason why it's so important for me is because growing up, I saw so many great supercars. I saw so many unique supercars. And I think that when I saw the Honda K48, something really inspired me. I think that this motor has a lot of heart. I haven't seen it running yet, but the concept of it is quite good, and I think that it's worth talking about. So for starters, the K48 is a total powerhouse. A lot of people knock it down for being just a K24 that was put into that was basically paired up, and that makes it kind of a boring motor. It's actually more than that. For starters, all of racing history, pairing two motors together, building a V-shaped motor out of it, is actually one of the most potent ways of making big power. Before boost, we did this quite a lot. That's how we built the first inline eights. That's how we built like flat 12s and things like this. But when it came to boost versus cylinders, that's when we started shying away from adding more cylinders overall. And the revolution of turbo fours in the late 80s and early 90s really pushed away the cylinder count for big power. And that was because in most applications, the amount of boost level you're getting out of a big turbo made up the difference of torque and power numbers that the four cylinder is kind of lacking from the factory. But here's the main issue. The main issue is your turbo is still going to be limited, is going to be now limited on the amount of gas that your motor can push. And so your motor has to push an overbearing amount of gas, which then makes these weird fluttery and not very precise throttle response motors, very laggy motors. And that's all fine and dandy in situations where you're going straight line, but it kills a lot of the power band in corners and in different factored environments. That's why you'll have a lot of motor engineers, powertrain engineers, that talk about the probability, the statistical probability of using that power band, and we see that we have very low statistical probability of turbo fours being very efficient. Here's what makes the K48 a total powerhouse. For starters, think of the K48 as a Coyote 5.2. It's a flat plane crank, so more like a Voodoo, V8, 5 liter, almost 5 liter. Actually, you could get a 4.8, a 5, or a 5.2 depending on the bore size and the stroke that you want. It's 100% billet. It's got it basically is built to rev to 10,000 RPM freely. It uses a reverse flow. So instead of pairing them up like a normal V8, we're pairing them in a reverse fashion, which allows you to have a gigantic exhaust in the middle. And that is a very special thing, and there's two applications you can do with that. It also allows for asymmetric ITBs on both sides of the engine, or in other words, asymmetric throttle bodies, which is an advantage in a lot of situations, and that's another hint for what we could do with it. It's got iron sleeves, which means it's easy to repair overall when you get it all kind of taken apart. And it's a race bred motor. That means that the motor is inherently made to be as lightweight as possible, as oil efficient as possible, while also being, not the most repair friendly motor. But here's the thing, the advantage is that it's on a K platform. That means that you can use K crank case, K valve springs, valve system, and so all of those architectural components are kept in the motor, which is awesome. And another thing that I didn't add on this or mention is that the K48 in terms of dimension and weight is lighter and much smaller than the Voodoo V8s, because the Voodoo V8s are built to be very easy to work on, whereas the K motors are just built to make as much power as possible, and the K architecture makes up the difference in terms of servicing fees and things like this. So in other words, it's an exotic engine that can take really cheap parts. It's just that you have to actually work on it like an exotic motor. So that's actually quite advantageous, and it's similar to, like, let's say an Audi V10 or like a Viper V10. You get the same exotic maintenance cost, but you get the advantages that the parts are plentiful and easy to repair. So that's quite good. In fact, the motor is so light and it is so small dimensionally that it's actually smaller and lighter than a 2GR V6, a Toyota 2GR V6. That's another hint. Now the Spirit. What do you do with a motor that's so powerful, that's so amazing, and that can be put pretty much in any car you would want? Well, here's a couple of examples. Really, the spirit of what we want usually in these situations is big motor, small car. Here's a couple of examples. The MGB GT V8, which came with a 3.5 liter Rover V8, which was an early gen all aluminum V8, very powerful, very potent, not very reliable, but it was paired with a 4-speed manual, and it was a true British bruiser. This is one of the originals, and it competed directly with some of the most beautiful cars of its time, the Jaguar E-Type, the Lamborghini Miura, and things like this, while also being very, very, very cheap. In fact, this car is an engineering marvel, considering that it was during the worst times of the British automotive industry. It is very, very surprising that it even came to fruition. Similarly, the Shelby GT350 and pretty much all of the Mustang lineup that was big motor, small car, those cars were amazing. The first gens especially could be gotten with a 429 V8, which was just an incredible lump of power. And on top of that, it could be had with a Paxton supercharger. Paxton would sell you the supercharger wherever you were in the States. It's a 50-state legal supercharger kit that you could put onto your car, and it made about 100 horsepower more. So those were really, really powerful and fairly cheap for the time. Then we had some more exotic stuff. So the Daihatsu Pantera, the Lotus Esprit V8, and the Mazda RX-7 FD, which unfortunately became an exotic car. Those three took that recipe to another level. Not only was it a race-bred motor, but in these cases, it was actually a homologation motor that they ended up putting into an exotic chassis. And I think the car that kind of adds kind of that layer of realism, and also the price was a lot better than any of these cars, was the Corvette series. Really, the Corvette is like this race car for the poor, and a really good example of kind of like this race-bred mentality that Corvette keeps on bringing back in its lineup, because of course the convertible versions are not really race car, more like race inspired. But the C4 Corvette Grand Sport, among many other Corvettes that they've come out in the years, was truly a race car for the poor. It had ZR1-like performance while also being extremely reliable, being on an LT platform, on a basic small block platform. So we're looking for something like this. This is a spirit that the motor really exudes. And I think the twin-turbo V8 out of the Lotus Esprit is something actually quite similar from the situation we have here. So we get to the concept now. Well, look, we have the motor. We know around about the power and the power-to-weight ratio that it can have. So why not put it into something that had that spirit back in the day? And I think the concept would be a modern-day Lamborghini Miura. It would be a very cheaply built V8, very short wheelbase supercar that would be incredible in the corners and a surprising amount of power on the top speed. Other cars that have done this recipe were cars like the McLaren F1, the Lamborghini Sesto Elemento, and some other great cars. But the difference is we're going to make it for cheap so that everyone can really access this car and be able to enjoy it. So really, I want the Sesto Elemento's spirit, because I feel like it's a new Miura. It's the newest Miura that they've ever built. But I want it for the masses. And so some cars that remind me of this are, for instance, kit cars like the the Superlight that we see right here. This is the Superlight SLC, I believe, that is fairly long wheelbase over some other cars. It's supposed to be kind of like a LMP type supercar, but also it's able to put pretty much any motor you want in it. So I feel like we could get a smaller chassis and do a better job at it. And here we have an elongated Lotus Exige. I think that is really the bones that we want to use for this car. And then we have some Mura concepts, you know, around here on this page. So the execution. I strongly feel as though a Lotus Exige with a V8 K48 motor is an extremely good bone structure for the car. I believe that the K48 making 750 horsepower means that we would have to have a wider body or some lengthening so that in the corners the car's geometry would work with the power band. I think that the choice of a 6-speed manual or a sequential transmission will be very, very smart. I'm not sure what that would mean for the transaxle, although I believe most people just use a Porsche PDK or a Porsche 6-speed or 7-speed. So that's something that I think would be quite beneficial. And I feel like the car needs to be an emotions-based car and not so much a top speed or high-performance car. So something like, you know, like a Sesto Elemento beater would be something that I think would be a good standard. But another car that I believe the look of it and the feel of it would be really well pronounced is like the Spagna. This Spagna, I mean, it's a beautiful car. It's an elongated Gallardo chassis, and it really shows its presence on the road. It also has a couple of nice features that we like to give, like that supercar owners really enjoy, like a big rear wing and an adjustable wing, and you know, obviously you want to have the premium feel of the car. I think that we could cut down on the premium feel. We could kind of give the sleekness by removing the crazy aero, and then the rest of the car we would build obviously fiberglass to be as cheap as possible. The regular car is like made out of aluminum, so it's fairly cheap to build, especially in Quebec or in Canada. And then the rest we would build like a roll cage to kind of keep the components of the car. And that, I feel like it would be a very cheap platform to build on. Of course, the only problem is Lotus doesn't build the Exige anymore, so we would have to build our own Exige somehow by, for instance, like using a patent. That's pretty much the end of the story here. I think that with the current market and the conditions of the market, I feel like it would be very well received, the car. I'm not sure if we would be able to make a large margin on the car. Obviously, we want a cheap car because we want to reach as many people as possible. But I feel like the most expensive part would be getting the license to build the chassis, building the actual chassis in-house, and then finding a way to put the motor into the chassis. The motor itself would be, you know, fairly inexpensive once you get the factory running. But once you're building the motor, you can offshoot the motor and sell it as like a one piece to anyone that is interested. So anyone K series swapping, any K series race cars would be very, very interested in the V8s that we build. So that way we could pay off a little bit of what the factory builds. And then the rest would be premiumizing the car and building it en masse. I feel like this car, it would compete against the Audi R8 of yesteryear, Maserati MC20, obviously the Lamborghinis that are now way too expensive, the Ferraris, which are also getting way too expensive with the hybridization, all that crap, and none of them actually provide a manual. So I think that's where we would get the edge on everybody else. And of course, it would be literally like a Gordon Murray T50, but a little slower, but with more of the feeling. And also, if you break it, if you play crazy with it, you don't feel bad if you break it because it's all easy to fix. It's all parts you can find anywhere. So anyway, that's the video I wanted to make, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. This was Trackbo, and have a good day.